Today's tutorial will be on making a VR user interface panel. So a tool that will allow you to have some buttons that do things in the world. I was going to make a simple panel that would be just a box with a few box-based buttons, but I decided to actually bring in this three-dimensional remote control. This is a model off of Google Poly's Poly by Google creators called Remote Control, and I thought it was kind of cool. So I just brought it in really quickly. It's kind of, you can imagine it being a tool panel, and what we're going to do is create buttons on, different parts of this to interact with. And we're here in a world which I believe we used to teach concepts on simple interactable press the button to make things happen that we taught on 30 Days of Symmetry Day 2. And so this is our kind of press the button playground. And I'm kind of flying through here. Let me go ahead and get you guys a monoscopic view. We can afford to do it. I'm gonna press escape for a second here. I'm going to go to edit, preferences. We go to the outputs, and on the outputs we've got one of the displays, which is the what's rendering out of my VR headset, which is the HMD camera display. And I'm going to render out a screen display, render it as screen, not as a stereoscopic VR. And when I render as screen and add one of those, you would do new screen display output and hit OK. What you're going to now get to see when I go into VR is a full monoscopic view, so you don't see the right eye and left eye. We get a nice screen display for you, and you can always do that if you're trying to kind of display. Recognize that it forces your computer to render to your VR headset a left and right eye, and then also render a different image for the computer display. So it asks a little bit more of your GPU to pull that all off. But so today we're going to make the interactions of, we're going to be able to carry around the interactions. And if you've been following us for 30 days, this might actually seem like a no-brainer, because we've already done a lot of these tutorials on just creating simple buttons that run simple scripts that do things like make things appear, toggle the time of day property, so it becomes night, and then reverse from nighttime. We've got this sound playing item. We've got this make something jump. So we can sort of bring something into the air. I didn't make that one grabbable. Color change here, where we're changing colors. So I'm going to just give you an example of the basic principles for which you can make one of these types of panels that moves around. There's a lot of ways that we think about kind of a UI panel for something in VR, and I kind of love this one, the one that's sort of kind of kinematically floating in air. We could figure out a way to have it follow us, or to be able to summon it by pressing a button and having it kind of come snap in towards our hand. It could also live on our hand. It could live in our left hand. Google's Tilt Brush has that, and others do sort of a palette in your left hand, which the equivalent would be you wouldn't have to press a button, but it would just live there, and it would sort of look like this. It would obviously be much smaller. This one's just kind of comically large. But yeah, it would kind of cruise along with us like so, and we'd come over. So I've already wired this one up. With a button here. So this green button is just like the other button out in space. And when I'm pressing it, it's making something jump. It puts an impulse onto our lackadaisical rocket here. The red button. What is our red button set to do? Did I get a interaction on our red button? I may have not. Oh, that might actually be playing the audio, and I can't quite hear it. But let's take a look at what the red button is. Right here I've got the remote control. This is the whole apparatus here. It's grabbable with this inherent grabbable interaction, and we'll be setting this up in a second. The green button, if I right click to edit the code that's on the green button on its on press event, that's the one applying the central impulse. So that's applying the impulse to our rocket. And what's on our red button? Nothing. That's why it did nothing. So let's actually make it do something, and then we'll kind of set up this from scratch, and we might make this work in a few ways, and I'll talk about some of the a few possible different design paradigms for a button UI. So let's take a look. So let's make I'll just describe what's happening here. We have this object. We have this object which is grabbable, that is a remote control, and living on it is a button. And the remote control has a rigid body, so it's speaking to and from the physics engine, and it's not movable. It can also be inactive, but that allows it to be grabbed in such a way where it has kind of that nice kind of physics. It follows me, but sort of with a little bit of lag and a little bit of spring. So that's why it has this rigid body, and it's carrying a green and a red button, which do not have rigid bodies. They're just cylinders, regular cylinder entities. And actually, the model itself had green and red buttons in there, which I went ahead and just drew ones over it, so that we would have an on-press event that would be specific to this one region right here. And so these buttons, each of these buttons has an interactable attribute that we added through here, just like we did out here in lesson 2, where our each of our in-world buttons, they just had an interactable on them. In this case, we're carrying along these cylinders with no rigid body that have an interactable attribute. And on the interactable on press event, the green one does basically the exact thing as what's over here. And let's do something for the red one. We'll just right click to hit edit code on the red button, and we're going to write a little code that says on press. And we could do just about anything, but what I'm going to do is, why don't we do what's in the green button, except we'll go to the left. We'll move it to a different direction. Show you here. Paste that exact code in, and instead of going in the upward direction, we will go in the sideways direction. So now we're going to apply an impulse in the X direction when I press the red, and we're going to apply in the Y direction when I press the green. And that interactability allows me, that interactable on the overall object here, that grabbable fixed, lets me grab it and place it. The fact that its rigid body is set to movable false means that it'll just sit there in the air. And in fact, it will be collidable with some items, which you may or may not want, and we can control for that a little bit later. See, it's actually will collide with our rocket here. The green is making it go up, and like I said, the red, see which direction it wants to go. So green goes up, red is going sideways. Don't have a great way of getting it back at this point. So you can see really quickly how that was done. So let's set one of these up from scratch. I'll make a separate menu, and I won't do it. I won't use a 3D model to do it. But we'll make a little panel that can do a few things here from the same world. So the principle really is, I'm going to toggle off VR for a second. The principle really is having an entity, like a plane or a cube. I mean, your menu, it could be volumetric, like this is. This This is volumetric, right? 3-dimensionally. It could be a 2-dimensional plane that kind of, sits in front of you. So let's draw one that's just a plane, and we can take the same concepts and work them in this direction as well. So I'll kind of give you the bare bones of what you need, and then you'll be able to, extrapolate from there. So what we're going to do is just create a plane entity, and we're going to draw it on the ground, and it's almost going to look disappeared until we lift it up in the air. So as soon as we lift it up in the air, we can kind of see it. And let's say that this will be our menu of button options. And I'm going to kind of come at this angle here. I'm going to rotate it up to vertical, and we'll basically think that this is kind of like a billboard, menu on a wall. Sometimes, if we put it in the hand, it'll go in any direction that you place it. But certain times menus, in VR space, will tend to fall anywhere along, this rotation, right? That you might look at them absolutely directly. Just so you can imagine, like any sign that you encounter in the real world. Sometimes you go to a kiosk and it's at waist height, and it's it's like a plaque or something that's describing the national forest and what you're seeing, and it's angled like this, and there's a map on it. And I'll leave that up to you, right? But just as a thought, you can imagine your plane working anywhere on this angle. So if you're going to make it stationary and static, that's one, that's an obvious consideration you might make. Additionally, the making an object movable is grabbable is what I did over here, and then because its rigid body was fixed, meaning that it was movable false, it would stay where it was placed, which was really pretty nice, because then I can kind of carry it with me but also leave it in space. So let's do one that's in world, one that's movable, and we'll eventually get to one that is fixed on our hand. So you can kind of think that those might be the way that you would do it. If it's fixed in space, again, you're going to kind of like need to sort of figure out how it's oriented, and if it's being carried like our remote control was, you won't need to worry at what angle it's presented. And then when it's on your hand, you will give some thought to that, but it's, I think, that's a matter kind of I think of ergonomics, and I think some of the programs like Google Tilt Brush give us a good prototype for what interactions are comfortable and in what way. And some of the finer details of that interaction are kind of out of the scope of this basic tutorial, but we'll get to them, I think, here in the 30 days as we kind of drill down towards the finger level. Okay, so let's see what happens when we press play. We're gonna snap to this VR rig. So what I'm gonna do is actually I'm just going to deactivate the rig for a second so that we don't. I'm gonna delete the rig here for the time being. So if I have a panel that I'm gonna place in space, when I press play, it just falls to the ground. So what I want to do is have it be, if this will be our one that's just like a placard, like a billboard. I'm actually going to make it its rigid body fixed in space, so it's movable set to false. So this will take collisions. I mean, if you're just creating an interactive item that's like a placard in space that isn't going to be grabbable or movable, it doesn't even need a rigid body at all. So this could be set to movable false, which means things will bounce off of it, but it won't fall based on gravity. So it means it's got an active rigid body. It just is fixed in space. So we call this like fixed when movable is false. It could be inactive, which will make it kind of a ghost item. Meaning that it's traversable. Things can move through it. Things won't collide with it, and physics won't work on it. Or it could be removed entirely. And we're going to go ahead and for this one, we'll just remove it entirely. So this is just the one that's going to be stationary. So this is kind of our first idea of a menu. What we should do is we'll put a little text on it. So what I'm going to do is actually go to Entities and go to Text. And if I click on the plane, my text shape will be planar to this object. You see that it kind of snaps to being planar to this to our plane. And it would need to be pulled out some, and you can pull it out. Using the transform like so. Another option is to use to switch from the world transform set to the local transform set. World, by pressing L, we transform from we toggle between moving this in a world or a local manner. Local moves along the axis of my text shape, which is now oriented to the axis of our panel. And so kind of when you're making these, making kind of like a UI panel or something like that, understanding how these kind of axes work with one another is important. So that's why I showed you that if you put the text entity on this guy, it draws at the same angle as the plane. And as you go to move it, I'm not moving it direct. I'm not moving the text shape. If I move it in the world frame, I'm not moving it directly out, like normal to this surface, perpendicular to this surface. If I'm in the world frame, but if I'm in its local frame, you can see this box shifting. World wants to pull it off at an angle. Local will be pulling it off. If I hold down Shift, I'll constrain to this axis. It now moves along that angle, or if I get right near where I grabbed it, it'll move down. It moves exactly down parallel to this plane. So that's me holding Shift down in the local transform frame. So local meaning specific to my shape, my text shape itself. That'll become important. And one more thing that we'll show you once this text entity becomes kind of a sub-item or a child, as it's called, of the plane entity. So anyway, just a few construction things. Those can like trip you up and make it kind of painful, but we've got some tools here that make it easier. So I just clicked R and scaled down my text item, my text shape. And since I'm staying in the local transform frame, so then along this plane, I'm just moving up and down the plane. I'm going to go ahead and unpack the mesh model on the text shape and select text shape. Let's actually first give it a color. So I'm going to go back up to the top level entity, color. I'll be boring and make it black, which is fine. And let's go ahead and make our background even like more white. I know that seems boring. But let's take a look at our text shape. You can see that it's casting shadow. It's got this kind of drop shadow situation, which we don't have to approximate the way that Photoshop does, which just totally exists. We may not want that. Let's imagine that we don't want it. We have this option called cast shadow under your top level item on the text entity. You could turn off cast shadow if you wanted to.